Secretary, I am very concerned about the morale of our ICE officers. I've spent 15 years as a federal prosecutor working with customs officers and Border Patrol agents and others. You like to see them motivated, excited about their work, believing in what their work, and they have to believe that people at the top support them and believe in the mission they've been given. And there's a real problem with this. In June of last year, the ICE union cast a unanimous vote of no confidence in the Director of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, Mr. Morton, and the Assistant Director of ICE Detention Policy and Planning, Phyllis Colvin. That was just last June. And they found that, quote, senior ICE leadership dedicates more time to campaigning for immigration reforms aimed at large-scale amnesty legislation than advising the American public and federal lawmakers on the severity of the illegal immigration problem, the need for more manpower and resources within ICE and ICE ERO to address it. And they are currently, they say, overwhelmed by massive criminal illegal alien problem in the United States. And they go on to say, this was in 2010, ICE is misleading the American public with regard to the effectiveness of criminal enforcement programs like the secure community programs, and using it as a selling point to move forward with amnesty-related legislation. And this is their statement. Then again, in June of this year, they report in this release, say, quote, ICE union leaders say that since the no confidence vote was released, problems within the agency have increased, citing the director's latest discretionary memo as one example. Quote, any American concerned about immigration needs to brace themselves for what's coming, close quote, said Chris Kane, president of the National ICE Council that represents 7,000 agents, officers, and employees. Quote, it goes on to say, this is just one of the many ICE policies that is stopping the enforcement of U.S. immigration laws in the United States. Unable to pass its immigration agenda through legislation, the administration is now implementing it through agency policies. And he goes on to note that while immigrants' rights groups and others were involved in this policy, no input in these policies was received from the agency and its employees, which is one of the previous complaints that they've had. So, Madam President, first, are you concerned about this? For 2 years now, it appears the representative group for these officers have voted no confidence in your leadership. And to what extent have you confronted this question, met with them, examined the charges that have been made, and made a formal response to them?
Well, let me, if I might, Senator, I, like you, have worked as a prosecutor for many years, particularly on border and immigration-related matters, and I believe that the priorities we have set are actually enhancing morale amongst our troops. And I think results matter, and the results are really incontrovertible now. We are removing more criminals from the United States than at any prior time. Now, with respect to priorities that have been set, when you actually read what Director Morton sent to his troops, he refers in that document to a number of prior memos by prior directors that were in his or similar positions back in the old INS days. And the priorities set are very similar historically, and that's because they make common sense and they reflect the reality that we've never had enough resources to remove everyone who's in the country illegally, and so you've got to have priorities and give guidance to the field across the country about what the priorities are.
I'm just focusing mainly on the problems within the department. I am told from leaders of the ICE officers that morale is very low. and that they believe the new standards calling on them to consider DREAM Act type issues in determining whether or not the person they've detained ought to be released or not, whether they've got a high school diploma, whether or not they might be a witness to a crime, that these are very confusing directives, and that makes it more difficult for them to act effectively to apprehend people here illegally. Now, see, you're very disdainful about that.
Not disdainful. I'm not disdainful.
I would just say that these are people on the front lines. You've not been out there having to deal with these arrests every day.
Let the Secretary answer the question.
And I say, from me, as a person who worked with federal agents for years, when you hear this kind of comment and votes of no confidence, I've never heard of that, you should be paying real attention to them, not rolling your eyes at them.
I'm not rolling my eyes. What I'm suggesting is that results matter here, and priorities really matter, and that the results reflect the priorities we have set. And these are priorities that are consistent with prior administrations and indeed with what I testified to this committee my first months in office,
well,
that this is what we were going to do.
I'm told that ICE carried over from last year 19,000 removals, and they're counting them this year, and it's sort of a gimmick to making the removals look higher than they are. Are you aware of that?
Oh, I think what you're referring to, Senator, is in the movement from FY9 to FY10, we made the decision that we would not count a removal until there was an actual verified departure from the country. And that had the effect of moving some removals from 09 into 10 because there was a calendaring, there was the removal order, but we didn't actually verify the departure until FY10. We have continued that practice into FY11 so that the comparison between the 10 and the 11 numbers are exactly the same.
What I'm hearing is that while claiming to arrest more criminal aliens, internal ICE documents show that DHS leadership has ordered field officers not to arrest fugitives and reentries, and leadership efforts to conceal this from the public has led to confusion in the field. Officers are afraid to arrest, and suspected illegals have been aggressively pushing back, even showing agents the memo that you have. When they stop them, they show the memo and say, President Obama says you can't arrest me, close quote.
Well, if they say that, they're not reading it correctly, because that's exactly not the case. They can be arrested. But at some point in the process, there need to be decisions made about who is to be removed. Now, we just had a discussion about how much it costs to detain somebody with Senator Durbin. It costs in the neighborhood of $23,000, $30,000 to actually remove somebody. That's our cost. Doesn't include Justice Department costs. The Congress gives us the ability to finance removals of 400,000 people a year. We can just remove anybody without any priorities, and that would be one way to do it. Or the other way, and the better way, and probably the way you ran your office when you were a prosecutor, is to say, we want to focus on expediting the removal of those who are criminals, of those who are fugitives, of those who are repeat violators, of those who are recent entrants, meaning within 5 years, into the United States. And what you are now seeing is that the numbers reflect those priorities.
Well, you have a problem with morale. I'm confident. I think the officers feel like you spent more time talking with the activist groups and the officers themselves in drafting guidelines that help them do their job. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.